Welcome back to another Pirkei Avot text explication video with me, your host, Rabbi Drew. We are now on the fifth text in the fifth chapter. And just as we have seen with the first four texts in this chapter, there is no particular name ascribed to this, and the number 10 features prominently. So we're just going to roll into it. 10 wonders were wrought for our ancestors back in the Holy Temple times. This text kind of makes a little bit of a departure from the first four. Yes, we are talking about 10. And yes, it's hearkening back to some previous time. The first four texts all related back to the book of Genesis. Talking here about the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, this is not as far back. It's not clear, however, whether this is talking about the first temple, which still would have been in biblical times, or if we're talking about the second temple, which would have been destroyed for only a century or two, so it would have been a lot more recent. Okay, so what are these 10 wonders? Now we have previously we encountered 10 wonders in the previous text in discussing the 10 miracles that were done for our ancestors in Egypt, and then another further 10 that were done at the sea. So now it's talking about 10 that were done for our ancestors in the Holy Temple. The first one, no woman miscarried from the odor of the sacred flesh. Okay, that's an interesting one. I guess theoretically a pregnant woman might just smell a horrific odor and would have miscarried, but clearly the sages felt for this text that it was a very strong likelihood that this could happen, and yet this was miraculously no woman ever did. The second one, the sacred flesh never became putrid. I guess because it was outside, it could have been hot, it could have become putrid, and yet miracle number 2, it did not become putrid. Number 3, no fly was ever seen in the slaughterhouse. Okay, now we're talking, because there's a bunch of dead animals, and definitely when there are carcasses laying around, flies seem to attract. And yet here, the sages are pointing out this is a miracle that no flies were ever seen. Number 4, no seminal emission occurred to the high priest on Yom Kippur. Okay, and had that occurred, he would have to then, I think they would have to replace him. I think they would have to have a sort of a backup high priest, a backup Kohen Gadol, to then carry out the very special service that was supposed to be done in the Holy Temple on Yom Kippur. Okay. Number 5, the rains did not extinguish the fire of the wood pile. Okay. Makes sense, right? Water, fire, and yet this fire remained despite rains. Okay, very neat, very neat. All right, we've got 5 down, we got 5 to go. Number 6, the wind did not prevail against the column of smoke. Again, this is very similar to what we just encountered in the previous one as far as rain extinguishing fire. Now we have the wind not prevailing against the column of smoke. Okay, lovely. Number 7, no defect was found in the omer, the 2 loaves, nor in the showbread. So they bake these breads. These are all sort of grain products, and yet no defect was ever found in them. Okay, that's great. Number 8, the people stood pressed together. This is a fascinating one. The people stood pressed together, yet bowed down and had room enough. Omdim sefufim ushtachavim revachim. That's really interesting that there's so many people, and I think this is really particularly talking about the various, the Shalosh Regalim, the 3 pilgrimage festivals in which men from all over would come to Jerusalem and pray in the Holy Temple, and they're saying, okay, obviously there are spatial concerns here, and yet even though people might have been pressed together and they bowed down, yet there was still enough room. Okay, that is pretty miraculous. Number 9, never did a serpent nor a scorpion harm anyone in Jerusalem. It's the Middle East. Clearly there are serpents and scorpions around, and yet in Jerusalem it didn't happen, that harm came to people. Again, I think this refers back to perhaps pilgrimage festivals, people coming and perhaps not even being familiar necessarily with the fauna, as it were, the sort of the wildlife, especially scorpions and snakes, and yet people were not harmed by these. That is pretty miraculous. And number 10, nobody said to their friend, there is not space for me to reside in, not to reside, but to visit Jerusalem. I just lost it for a moment. That there's no space for me. Just going to get it back for everybody. Just going to pull it back up. Yes. Okay, here we go. I'm sorry about that delay. No person said to his fellow, nobody, and I think this is a particularly gendered, no man specifically ever said to his fellow, the place is too congested for me to lodge overnight in Jerusalem. Now, this again, I believe, is related to the previous two, in that the specific context is talking about the three pilgrimage festivals, those being Passover, Shavuot, which we're about to experience, and Sukkot. So those are the three pilgrimage festivals that men from all over Israel would come and worship. So nobody ever said the place is too congested for me to lodge overnight in Jerusalem. Now that's actually particularly fascinating because, as you can imagine, there are a lot of people coming to town, and yet somehow there were enough places of lodging. Again, the assumption going into this is that that's impossible. And yet, as this text states, it's a miracle that there were enough spaces, enough spots, enough beds for people. And I think specifically, again, I think this might be gendered, specifically men to lodge in Jerusalem. So these are the 10 wonders. These are the 10 miracles. Asar Nisim, whether we want to call them wonders, whether we call them miracles. I mean, it's interesting even when we think about how do we translate Nisim? Do we say these are miraculous occurrences? Okay, they're not as miraculous as the splitting of the sea. People standing together yet bowed down and had room enough. Do we consider that a miracle? Well, this is certainly special. This is certainly shocking. This is certainly surprising. It's even wondrous. Miracle? Unclear, but this is all sort of under the umbrella of the term nes, or Asar Nisim, that these 10 miracles or wondrous occurrences happen back in the temple time. So again, a lot of these the first 3 of them were related to the flesh, really the animals that were being sacrificed. The 4th one was about the high priest on Yom Kippur. Number 5 and 6 were about the rains and the wind against the fire and the smoke. Number 7 is about all these grain products not having defects. And then the final 3 are about people, and probably specifically men, coming to Jerusalem, probably specifically for the Shalosh Regalim, for these 3 pilgrimage festivals. And yet, wonder of wonders, these things there was enough room, both for people to lodge and also for people to be involved in worship in the temple. So 10 wondrous things that happened for our ancestors back in the temple times. All right, we have one more text that talks about the number 10, and then we move on to the number 7 in this series. All right, so thank you so much for watching.